Hey everybody, Gromos here with another DCS video, and this time I take another look at Leathernecks MiG-21 BIS, one of my favorite planes in DCS. I made a video or two about the MiG-21 already, but I have not talked too much about the plane itself, so I figured I'd make another quick video with the MiG-21 and talk briefly about the plane and its history, and then take a look at a short mission or two showing the plane in one of its typical roles as an interceptor. Now, as I have said in the past, I'm very interested in second and third generation fighter planes from the late 50s to mid 70s, when technologies like radar-guided missiles and the like did already exist, but were not as sophisticated yet and often analog, not digital. And the MiG-21 BIS of course falls right in this area. The plane was initially developed as a light fighter and interceptor for daylight operations and entered service in 1959. Thanks to its low price, yet decent performance for its price, the plane was widely exported and is among the most produced aircraft ever. It is designed with a high emphasis on the high-speed interceptor role, which was considered a very important role at the time the plane was developed, by both the Soviet military as well as the US, as it was assumed at the time that future air combat would revolve around intercepting high-flying bombers which are carrying nuclear weapons. Though the experience in Vietnam showed both sides that in reality more traditional air combat, close air support and the like, was still what the respective air forces would primarily face. But the MiG-21 was originally designed before that and therefore optimized for high speed, and with its thin delta wings does not like slow speed maneuvering too much. It is however lightweight enough that it can still maneuver pretty good and better than many other fighters of its era, which were also designed with high speed over maneuverability in mind. Though newer designs which had a higher emphasis on maneuverability again will generally be better turners. Now, the first version of the MiG-21 were still considered second generation fighters and did not have radar to search for targets yet. Only a ranging radar similar to what you see on the F-86 Sabre, for example, for helping to aim the guns. And the first version of the fighter, which was only built in small numbers, had an armament of two 23mm cannons and one 30mm cannons, but did not carry any missiles yet. Though that changed pretty quickly, and with the F-13 variant that followed the original plane into production, the capability to carry R-3 infrared-guided missiles, a copy of the Sidewinder, was introduced, while the cannon armament got reduced. Now, this variant was one of the MiG-21 variants used in Vietnam by the North Vietnamese Air Force. Now, the fighter at this point still did not have a radar and was considered a daylight fighter and interceptor with limited effectiveness at night, though with ground control guidance it could also be used in this role. But to improve the plane's capability and give it all-weather capability, the MiG-21 BFM version was equipped with the RP-21 Sapphire radar. In the MiG-21 BIS, the version we have in-game, we have the improved RP-22 version of that radar, and this version, that entered service in the 70s, is by now also considered a third-generation fighter, not second, as the early versions of the plane were. Now, the radar is relatively small and not very capable. It has a maximum detection range of just about 30 kilometers, so you still have to be pretty close to a target to find it with the radar, and in daylight conditions you will often be close enough to see the target with your own eyes by the time you got it on the radar screen. However, the MiG-21 is, like other Soviet fighters and especially interceptors of the area, meant to operate with ground control guidance, which means a controller on the ground would use a large long-range ground-based radar to guide the MiGs to intercept the target and close enough to acquire the target visually or with their own radar to attack it. That is of course also how MiG-21s operated, for example, during the Vietnam War, with the early versions of the MiG-21 the North Vietnamese used not being equipped with a radar, though the later PFM versions were. Now, as I have said, in daylight and in good weather you often don't need the radar to find a target, and by the time you are close enough for the radar to be useful, you often are in visual range already. But at night or in bad weather, or both, that of course looks different. Even with ground control guidance it can often be difficult to find a target you want to intercept at night. So in that case the radar, even with its limited range, is a great improvement, and what turns the fighter from a pure daylight fighter and interceptor into one with all-weather capabilities. And that is something I want to take a look at in a mission later. Also, while the radar has a limited detection range, it can be used to fire semi-active radar-guided missiles. the R3R for example. Now that missile has a short-range fire radar-guided missile and is still based on a captured sign radar. However, as a radar-guided missile, it can attack a target from all sides, while the older infrared-guided missiles used on the MiG-21 BIS will have trouble locking a target if they can't see the hot exhaust at the rear. Now, while the plane was developed primarily as an interceptor and light fighter at first, the MiG-21 does of course also have some ground attack options which were added later in its service life. The plane can carry mostly unguided munitions, but also some guided weapons. For unguided ones you have for example rocket pods for S-5 rockets, unguided bombs or the larger S-24 240mm rocket, which as far as unguided rockets go is my personal favorite. The plane can also use a beam-riding radar-guided missile, which I may take a closer look at in a later video. And last but not least, the plane can also carry gun pods with two 23mm cannons each, which is great against light vehicles and convoys. So you have some ground attack options in the MiG-21, and the plane is still often used in this role around the world. But in this video I want to look at a scenario with one of the plane's original primary roles as an interceptor, to also demonstrate quickly intercepting a target in DCS with the help of ground-based radar or an AWACS plane. So let's take a quick look at two very simple scenarios intercepting attacking planes. Let's start with a quick intercept scenario in daylight to go over the basics quickly. Now here we are tasked to intercept two enemy fighters that were detected approaching our airfield from the west before they can drop their bombs on the airfield. We use a ground-based radar to intercept them, as this was what the MiG-21 would generally be controlled by, as few of its users have access to AWACS planes. Though in the communications menu the ground control intercept controller is still called AWACS. In any case, in DCS they work the same, so an AWACS plane would be used in the same manner. When we contact the GCI radar and ask for a bogey dope, we ask him to give us the necessary info to intercept the target. If we ask about the picture, for example, he will tell us the information about all contacts in the area, one after another, so you can make yourself a picture of what is going on in the area. But in this case we just care about those targets we are supposed to intercept. When we ask for a bogey dope, we get what is called a BRA call back. BRA or BRA standing for bearing, range and altitude. So that's what the numbers we get mean. The first is the bearing to the target from our position, the second the range to the target, and then its altitude. Hot meaning it's getting closer and cold it is getting further away. So in this case our target is bearing 220 southwest of us, 110 km out and at 7000 meters altitude. And coming closer. Now since this is a Russian plane and radar, we are getting metric units by the way. With that info it is of course pretty easy to intercept the target. If you want to get a bit more sophisticated, you can use the change in bearing to the target between two BRA calls to get a rough estimate of the target's course, and use that to, for example, approach the target from behind and surprise it. I also got my RSBN navigation system set up to my home base, Covoletti, which can also be useful, as it shows me the vector to base and distance, so I always have at least a rough idea where I am, and don't get lost while concentrating on intercepting the target. It's not a moving map, but it is something. And if you know your position as well as a vector and distance to the target, you can pinpoint the enemy's location and course on a map pretty easily as well. Which again can be useful to, for example, approach target from behind instead of from the side, or if you intercept a fast-flying target by intercepting its flight path at an intercept point instead of flying straight at it. In this case though we fly pretty directly towards the target, pointing the nose at the compass bearing indicated by the ground control radar and climbing up to almost the target's altitude, though still staying a bit below as the MiG-21's radar is set up mostly to scan above the plane, and only 1.5 degrees below, so you have a better chance finding a higher flying target, while a lower target will often go undetected. With the MiG's radar not having true Doppler capabilities, it would have trouble picking out the target against the ground anyway, so you generally want to approach a target from below. Also, the radar of the MiG needs to be cooled down to work, and the plane is carrying a limited supply of cooling fluid to do so. Because that cooling fluid is limited, you only want to have the radar active when you need it. So it is currently set to standby, and I will turn it on when I'm in range to the target. However, after flying towards the target for a bit, I get closer to them faster than I anticipated. When I am doing my last corrections to intercept 2 enemy fighters, they are 23 kilometers away, inside radar range, and as often happens with this short-range radar, I gain visual contact to the targets before I even turn the radar on. Now, as I was approaching, I tried to stay just a little bit to the north of the targets, to sneak in behind them when I get close enough. And when I see them, they are slightly to my left, and I can indeed turn after them. I'm carrying 2 radar-guided missiles on the outer pylons and 2 infrared-guided ones on the inner 2 pylons. I plan to fire the radar-guided missiles first, and then, as I close in, switch to the infrared-guided ones. Now the enemy targets are just coming into view to my left, moving from right to left, and I change course to go after them, and I turn my radar on to get ready to attack them from behind as I close in on them. I don't get them on radar right away though. Since this is an older radar, it is often a bit unreliable, and detection will also depend on things like the speed difference between you and the target. There are a few filters you can use, but I'm already pretty close to the enemy fighters, and it seems they have not seen me yet. So eventually I decide to turn the radar off again before they spot me, and forget about the radar-guided missiles and use the infrared-guided ones right away, since I am by now closing in from behind and the engines of the enemy planes make a great target for the heat seekers. I switch my weapon system from semi-radar guided missiles to infrared guided and select the other 2 pylons which carry the heat seekers, and then I start to turn my nose at the first target, the enemy fighter in the rear of the formation. Now, once I do so, I get a lockdown from the missile, but I don't want to fire at maximum range. I start to get a bit closer to increase my chances of a hit by firing from closer range. The enemy fighters are still not aware of my presence, so I can get closer a bit more to make sure there is very little time for the enemy fighters to react to my missile, which almost guarantees a hit. Now, the first missile is off the rails and zoomed towards the enemy fighter, and I get a good hit, taking the first fighter out. Now on to the second one. I want to do a canopy roll to the left to get behind the second fighter and hopefully get my missile off before he can react, but he's already maneuvering, and I get a lockdown for a split second as the fighter F-16 flies through my sight, but not long enough to fire the missile, and from that angle it was unlikely it would have hit anyway. So we find ourselves in a turn fight with the Falcon, and I have to try to get my sight on the enemy fighter to shoot it with either my second heat seeker or my cannon. Now my 2 radar-guided missiles, which I still have, are not very useful in the situation, because with the MiG-21's older systems it would be very difficult to get a radar lock in a maneuvering fight like this. My heat seeker, on the other hand, as mentioned before, does not have true all-aspect capabilities, like more modern heat-seeking missiles do, so you have to be pretty much behind the enemy to get a solid lock most of the time, which is not easy in this case. The MiG-21 is lightweight and a decent turner for a fighter of its time, but more modern designs of course have the upper hand, and the MiG does not have a fly-by-wire system which prevents you from stalling the plane and losing control over it, so you have to be careful not to overdo it and try to keep your speed as high as possible, which in this case is made easier by our spiraling descent, which helps to keep the speed up. But of course such a descending spiral turn fight can't go on forever, because eventually we will run out of altitude. But this gives me the advantage in this case, because the Falcon ended up just slightly lower than I was on in the right moment and has to pull out of his turn to prevent running into the ground, giving me the opportunity to slot in behind the Falcon. I turn after the enemy fighter as it passes in front of my nose, and I get my pipper pointed at the enemy fighter. This time the infrared seeker of my missile can see the rear of the enemy plane, and I get the tone indicating the missile has a lock, and I fire. The Falcon drops flares, but the missile finds its mark and I get a hit on the second target. So, 2 targets intercepted and destroyed, mission success. Now that was a quick example for a daylight intercept. Now, seeing what you want to shoot down has its advantages, but of course thanks to its little radar the MiG-21 does count as an all-weather interceptor, so let's take a quick look at an example of a night intercept to see the differences. Now, the scenario is similar, though this time we are not facing fighters but a bomber, a B-1B Lancer to be exact, and again we are to intercept it and keep it from bombing its target. And we are again carrying 2 radar-guided K-13 missiles and 2 infrared-guided ones, on top of our 23mm cannon, and have a large radar system stationed at our airport to provide ground control guidance. Now, the basics are the same as in daylight. After takeoff, we get the bearing, range and altitude of the target from the radar and use this info for our intercept, either flying straight at the target or planning an intercept point, or trying to get behind the target. In a real GCI situation this would also be done by the ground controller, but in DCS we just get the info of the target, and if we want to plan an intercept point we have to do it ourselves. Now, we get the info from the radar that the enemy target is on bearing 314, northwest from our position, just having taken off Senakti Kolki, and 120 kilometers away at 7000 meters, and flanking, meaning not coming closer or flying away, but flying by us. This target is not heading for our airfield, but another target further south. So I turn till I point at the right heading, the compass is here, and start to climb to get closer to the altitude of the target. But again, I want to stay slightly lower as the radar is mostly looking up. I have my afterburners engaged to get to the target as fast as possible and with high speed. The B-1B isn't a slow plane itself, and we are still close enough to our base that we don't have to worry about fuel too much. I want to approach the target in such a way that I can attack it from behind, and since it is clear by now that it is flying more or less south, I keep my course always a little bit north of the target's position to be able to slot in behind it as I get closer. And while I do so, I continue to climb to get to the target's altitude. You can see the barometric altimeter here, left of the compass instrument. The small needle shows 1000 meters and the long one hundreds. Since the target is flanking, in this case I have to adjust my heading a few times as the position of the target changes as it moves south, but we are closing in on it quickly, and when we are about 50 kilometers away from the target, according to the info from the ground-based radar, I switch my own radar on to hopefully detect the target as soon as it comes into range, so I got as much time as possible to set up an attack. My radar was turned off earlier because the radar can only stay active a limited amount of time on the MiG before it runs out of coolant, and also to avoid being detected by the target's radar warning receiver further out, as this thing is fast and I don't want him to speed up while I'm still further away, as it would make it harder to intercept the bomber. The radar screen, which is located right behind the control stick, lights up, but so far I have nothing on the scope. Not surprising, since it has only a detection range of about 30 kilometers, and we were further out than that when I activated the radar. Though we should be coming up on 30 kilometers any second now. Now, as the seconds go by and I still don't have the target on the scope, I ask the ground controller again for a bra in case I got something wrong, and I double check my heading and altitude again to make sure they are correct, but just when I do so I finally have a target showing up on the scope. The little inverted T that just popped up on the radar screen. Now, the radar is showing us a top-down view in this search mode, and the target being shown as an inverted T with the small vertical bar being above the horizontal bar indicates that the target is above us. Would the vertical bar be below the horizontal one, so a normal T, it would be below us, and if it's just a horizontal bar, it's at the same altitude. Now, in order to lock the target, I have to move the target designation cursor, the small rectangular box, over the target and press the lock button. But unlike modern planes like the Su-27 or F-15, I can't really move it around, I can just move it forward or backward, not left or right. I have to move the whole plane to do that. But now we have the target locked and the radar switches to single target track mode. Now it is no longer a top-down view, now the radar shows us the target like we would look at it from our point of view. So if the target is in the left upper corner of the screen, we should see it if you look out of the window up and to the left, but it's dark so we won't. Range indication in this single target track mode is provided by 2 small vertical bars you can see on the large horizontal ones. Those move along the horizontal bar towards the middle of the screen, closer to the target symbol. The closer they are to the middle, the closer you are to the target. Here you also get some launch information for the semi-active radar missiles. As you can see, the horizontal lines are not stopping before reaching the target in the middle, creating little empty space. When the small vertical bars reach the empty zone, you are in fire range. But in this case I fire from a bit further away, since I wanted to fire my 2 radar-guided missiles and then switch to the heat seekers and fire those, and I don't want to overtake the target before I can do so. Now, it seems one of my radar-guided missiles hit, but the enemy bomber is still flying, and when I fire my heat seekers, the B-1B starts to drop flares and evades. Now the B-1B has pretty good countermeasures, and with his flare dropping and evasive maneuvers he manages to evade the infrared seeking missiles. But with my flare dropping I can pinpoint his position, and he seems to have multiple engines on fire from the earlier missile hit. And now I can keep an eye on the bomber with those small fires and close in to start to attack with my cannon once I am close enough to do so. The target is difficult to see in the dark, and I have to be careful not to run into it by accident as I attack, but with some of its engines on fire I can see the target well enough to fire 2 quick bursts from my 23mm cannons as I get close enough to do so. I could see 1 or 2 hits, but I'm not sure exactly how much I hit. I assume with the missile and cannon hits, the engines on fire and so on, the target will go down though, and I disengage for now. In the dark it is easy to make a mistake and dive straight into the ground trying to get another shot at the target that is already going down, so I break off for now. I asked the radar controller later for another bogey dope to make sure that the bomber did indeed go down, but he can't see the target anymore, so the B-1 did indeed go down. So, mission accomplished, and we can return to base. I have my home base already dialed in the RSBN navigation system, and can use it to get back home to the airfield. Well, those were 2 quick examples for intercept missions, simple examples admittedly, but I never had AVAX or GCI in a DCS video before, and that is something I wanted to show off in the video, especially at night and in the MiG-21, where I think such a mission can be quite fun, not just the intercept itself, but the night landing afterwards too. Well, and this is it for this video. I hope it was informative, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.